Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1970s Project Stargate. When the Pentagon tried to spy with its mind. The 1970 Stargate saga, if you ever want definitive proof that the Cold War made the United States military willing to try literally anything short of summoning Cthulhu to get an intelligence edge, look no further than Project Stargate. It remains the most famous and utterly baffling of several black-budget U.S. government initiatives that seriously investigated the potential of remote viewing. The alleged ability of the human mind to psychically tune in, peer across thousands of miles, and snoop on classified Soviet installations using nothing more than pure, unadulterated brainpower and a strong cup of coffee. Running from the jittery dawn of the 1970s all the way until its unceremonious termination in 1995, Stargate was technically not a UFO project. It didn't deal with flying saucers or alien metallurgy. Yet it sits right at the exact same weird, neonly intersection of high-level military panic, deep Cold War paranoia, and the desperate pursuit of fringe science that characterized the government's approach to the unknown. After all, when national security is on the line and you're terrified the other guys are winning the psychic arms race, the Pentagon stops laughing at crystal-waving mystics and starts writing blank checks. Project Stargate did not begin because a group of generals suddenly developed a deep spiritual interest in transcendental meditation. It was born out of pure, unadulterated geopolitical terror. During the early 1970s, U.S. intelligence agencies received increasingly frantic reports that the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies were heavily subsidizing research into psychotronics and parapsychology. Washington, thoroughly traumatized by the ongoing nuclear arms race and the Sputnik shock, immediately panicked over the prospect of a psychic gap. The prevailing logic in the intelligence community was beautifully, blindingly paranoid. If the Soviets are developing psychic spies to peer inside our secret underground bunkers, read our classified documents, and locate our ballistic missile silos with their minds, the United States damn sure can't afford to bring a butter knife to a telepathic gunfight. Fearing that the Kremlin might achieve absolute mental dominance, the U.S. government quietly authorized a program to determine if human consciousness could be weaponized as a legitimate, actionable intelligence gathering tool. Welcome to SRI, where physicists met psychics. The core of this mind-bending research wasn't conducted in some spooky, windowless dungeon in the Pentagon. Instead, it was outsourced to the sun-soaked intellectual paradise of California. Beginning around 1972, the experiments were housed primarily at SRI International, formerly the Stanford Research Institute, in Menlo Park. The project was championed and scientifically spearheaded by physicists Harold Howe Puthoff and Russell Targ, two brilliant researchers who were more than happy to march straight past the boundaries of orthodox physics and right into the twilight zone. To test whether the human brain could moonlight as a spy satellite, they enlisted a wonderfully eccentric roster of professional artists, former military officers, and natural sensitives. Ingo Swann, charismatic artist and occultist who basically helped draft the instruction manual for modern remote viewing, and famously claimed he could psychically describe the rings of Jupiter down to the dust bands before NASA's Pioneer 10 probe ever got out there to check his homework. Pat Price, a former police officer whose staggering pinpoint accuracy during early trials genuinely rattled his military handlers by allegedly describing top-secret Soviet military installations down to the exact building layouts, equipment specs, and crane schematics. Joe McMoneagle, a decorated Vietnam War veteran and career intelligence soldier whose rigid military background brought a much-needed layer of operational discipline to a program that otherwise sounded like a bad 1970s acid trip. What began as small-scale, highly skeptical experimentation at SRI eventually bloated into a sprawling, multi-agency intelligence program that bounced like a classified hot potato across the entire defense apparatus. Over more than 2 decades, the project was overseen by a rotating, exasperated cast of characters, including the Army, the CIA, and eventually the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. Because of shifting congressional oversight, budget cuts, and institutional paranoia, the program was forced to constantly shed its skin and reinvent itself under a dizzying parade of spy thriller code names that sounded less like top-secret defense initiatives and more like rejected punk rock band names. Gondola Wish sounds like a luxury vacation package for depressed billionaires. Grill Flame sounds like a desperate backyard barbecue emergency. Center Lane sounds like a mildly aggressive traffic advisory. Sunstreak sounds like a discount brand of margarine. Finally, in 1991, all these disparate psychic spy efforts were finally rounded up, dusted off, and consolidated under the ultimate blockbuster banner of Project Stargate. By the time the program was officially put out to pasture in 1995, following a brutally honest CIA-commissioned evaluation that concluded remote viewing was about as useful for real-time military operations as a magic 8-ball, Stargate had spent over 20 years proving a profound, paradoxical truth. The human imagination is a vast, untamable wilderness, and during the Cold War, the United States government was desperate enough to try mapping it with a pair of psychic dowsing rods. For over 2 decades, the U.S. military didn't just play high-stakes chess against the Soviet Union, they occasionally tried to play it using pure, unadulterated telepathy. Project Stargate deployed its roster of exhausted remote viewers into the shadowy world of operational espionage, tasking them with everything from locating missing crashed aircraft and hostage situations to peering inside heavily guarded, pitch-black Soviet R&D facilities where no human spy could ever hope to tread without accidentally getting caught on camera. Hits, misses, and million-dollar legal pads. It was essentially a high-stakes guessing game played on a multi-billion-dollar geopolitical scale. But did it actually work, or was Uncle Sam simply funding a very expensive group therapy session for folks who really liked sketching weird doodles on yellow legal pads? The answer depends entirely on which side of the Pentagon hallway you happen to be standing on. The success narrative, when the map was right, even if nobody knew why. Believers, camp loyalists, and former military handlers will look you dead in the eye and swear that Stargate wasn't just a bizarre exercise in taxpayer-funded sci-fi roleplay, it actually scored cold, hard, actionable intelligence. Supporters love to drop legendary anecdotes, where remote viewers allegedly hit absolute bullseyes. The Soviet megasub. In one of the movement's favorite flexes, a viewer successfully described the precise structural layout, dimensions, and construction progress of a massive, top-secret Soviet Typhoon-class submarine shipyard before spy satellites could even snap a clear picture of it. Hunting wreckage in Africa, viewers were routinely hauled out of bed to play hide and seek with lost military hardware. Proponents argue that the coordinates provided by the psychics guided recovery teams agonizingly close to a downed U.S. reconnaissance bomber, when conventional search grids had come up totally empty. To the true believers, these hits weren't just lucky guesses at the psychic casino. They were undeniable proof that human consciousness could rip a hole straight through space-time and read a blueprint from 3,000 miles away while wearing a bathrobe. Cross the corridor to the skeptical desk in the intelligence community, and later the broader scientific establishment, and you'll hear a very different, profoundly unamused story. The skeptics' workbench, vibes, doodles, and cold hard bureaucracy. Step across the corridor to the skeptical desk in the intelligence community, and later the broader scientific establishment, and you'll hear a very different, profoundly unamused story. Most career intelligence officers viewed Stargate's output as an unpredictable, wildly unreliable game of high-stakes guessing. The critiques were sharper than a freshly honed number 2 pencil. The squiggly line fallacy. Critics pointed out that remote viewing reports were overwhelmingly bloated with vague, poetic prose and ambiguous geometry. If a viewer drew a random squiggle and a square, an imaginative intelligence analyst could easily squint at it, tilt their head, and retroactively declare, "Aha! It's a secret Soviet radar tower," the absolute classic trap of cold reading and confirmation bias. The infinite spaghetti rule. When a psychic threw enough conceptual spaghetti at the wall, a few noodles were bound to stick by pure statistical coincidence. But when you needed precise, actionable intelligence to rescue hostages or track nuclear subs, good vibes and a charcoal sketch simply didn't cut the mustard. The bureaucratic guillotine, or how to kill a psychic spy. The psychic party officially came to a grinding, unceremonious halt in 1995. The CIA, utterly weary of funding a black-budget program that felt more like a parlor trick than a weapon of war, commissioned the American Institutes for Research, AIR, to conduct an exhaustive, independent scientific review of Stargate's entire history. The resulting report dropped like an administrative guillotine. The review flatly stated that remote viewing had not been shown to have value in intelligence operations and recommended that the program be put out of its misery immediately. And just like that, after 22 years, millions of taxpayer dollars, and countless sketchpads filled with psychic doodles, Project Stargate was locked in a filing cabinet and buried in red tape. The Pentagon officially decided it was time to stop asking the universe for supernatural cheat codes and go back to doing espionage the old-fashioned way, with wired apps, double agents, and multi-billion-dollar spy satellites that didn't need a meditation cushion. Why did Uncle Sam keep the psychic lights on for 20 years? If the results of Project Stargate were so chronically inconsistent, oscillating wildly between genius hits and absolute misses, why on earth did the United States government keep the psychic lights burning for over 2 decades? The answer doesn't lie in the mysterious laws of quantum consciousness. It lies in the much more predictable, terrifying laws of government bureaucracy. Stargate survived for 20 years not because it was wildly successful, but because once a black-budget defense program gets its tentacles into the Washington machinery, killing it is harder than squashing a cockroach with a diplomatic pouch. Like many deep state initiatives born out of cold sweat panic, Stargate quickly mutated into an entrenched, self-sustaining ecosystem. Once a dedicated psychic espionage branch was carved into the organizational chart, pulling the plug became an institutional taboo. Dismantling the program meant someone in a spotless suit would have to walk into a congressional budget hearing, clear their throat, and announce, "Well, gentlemen, we just spent millions of taxpayer dollars teaching guys to stare psychically at blank pieces of paper. And it turns out telepathy doesn't work on Tuesdays." No career-minded bureaucrat wanted to be the guy who signed off on that press release. It was infinitely easier, safer, and cheaper to quietly shuffle the files, change the code name from Grill Flame to Stargate, and kick the can down the road to the next unsuspecting administration. The fear of the psychic gap, or why the Pentagon bought an insurance policy on magic. At the beating heart of the military-industrial complex lies a profound, paralyzing dread known to insiders as technological surprise, lingering. Cold sweat trauma of waking up one morning to discover the enemy has built an atomic bomb or a Sputnik satellite while you were busy looking the other way. During the height of the Cold War, high-ranking Pentagon officials didn't necessarily need to believe in magic or telepathic mind melds. They just needed to be terrified that the Russians believed in it. The logic was pure, unadulterated risk management: if there was even a fractional 1% chance that Soviet psychotronics researchers had unlocked remote espionage, the United States felt strategically compelled to match it. Stargate wasn't funded because defense brass thought it was foolproof. It was funded as a high-end insurance policy against the terrifying possibility that the other guy might be winning the psychic arms race. Declassification, throwing raw meat to the internet. When Project Stargate was finally euthanized in 1995, following the brutal American Institutes for Research takedown, the CIA didn't quietly shred the documents and bury them in the Nevada sand. Instead, in a rare fit of bureaucratic transparency, they declassified the entire program and dumped it right in the lap of the public. Thousands of pages of raw Stargate session transcripts, shaky ink drawings, and deadpan analytical debriefings are now freely available online. And let's be entirely honest, declassifying the files didn't put the controversy to bed. It just threw a prime cut of raw meat directly to the internet. Making these files public did something wonderfully chaotic. It allowed civilian researchers, skeptics, and UFO historians to read the unfiltered transcripts of military remote viewers, trying to see things that completely broke conventional geography. We aren't just talking about Soviet submarine yards anymore. The declassified logs reveal wild, mind-bending sessions where viewers were tasked with psychically probing secret underground bases on the moon, scanning deep space anomalies, or, in one legendary, brain-melting assignment, trying to remote view Mars millions of years in the past, complete with vivid descriptions of ancient pyramids and towering alien humanoids. The ultimate government-funded sci-fi novel. In the end, Project Stargate left behind a legacy that is equal parts tragic, hilarious, and utterly captivating. It stands as a magnificent monument to what happens when Cold War paranoia marries unbridled human imagination. The psychics may not have won the Cold War, and they certainly didn't hand the Pentagon a magic crystal ball. But they did leave us with the greatest government-funded sci-fi novel ever written, one that proves the U.S. military once spent millions of taxpayer dollars trying to weaponize daydreams. While Project Stargate wore a completely different bureaucratic name tag than traditional UAP initiatives, like Project Blue Book or modern defense task forces, these cosmic oddities inevitably share a bed in the great, messy motel of fringe history. They are constantly being dragged together by researchers who love to connect the dots, especially when those dots cross over into the delightfully spooky territory of consciousness-based physics. Two sides of the same weird, multi-dimensional coin. A growing faction of investigators, alongside career researchers who happily bounce back and forth between ufology and parapsychology, argue that we are looking at two sides of the exact same bizarre, multi-dimensional coin. Their working hypothesis? The cognitive machinery that allows a trained remote viewer to sit in a quiet room in Maryland and psychically sketch a secret Soviet bunker is functionally identical to the mental mechanism required to interface with the erratic, physics-defying maneuvers of a UAP. In short, both phenomena represent a jarring, uninvited collision with a non-linear, higher-dimensional reality where space, time, and solid matter are treated more like polite suggestions than hard rules. Whether you view Project Stargate as a mind-bending masterclass in unlocking the hidden depths of human consciousness, or as an embarrassingly expensive chapter of military waste where generals paid psychic consultants to draw squiggly lines on legal pads, one thing remains certain. It stands as a towering, slightly absurd monument to the U.S. government's ultimate bottomless desperation. When national security is dangling by a frayed thread and Cold War panic sets in, the Pentagon is remarkably willing to throw away the rulebook, toss out orthodox physics, and stretch the boundaries of what is considered reality until it snaps. And honestly, you have to admire the sheer, unadulterated chutzpah. Most of us won't even text our ex when we're feeling insecure, but the United States military was ready to risk it all, pop open the third eye, and try to psychically spy on the entire Soviet bloc using nothing more than a sharpened pencil, a yellow legal pad, and a whole lot of crossed fingers. The Stargate illusion, what the Pentagon actually did and how ufology got it totally wrong. Let's be honest for a second. The name Project Stargate sounds infinitely cooler than it has any right to. When you hear Stargate, your brain immediately conjures up epic visions of James Spader stepping through a glowing, shimmering vortex, military commandos trading gunfire on alien dunes, or Kurt Russell looking heroic while saving the universe from ancient interstellar overlords. It sounds like high-stakes sci-fi at its absolute peak. So what did the U.S. military actually deliver behind that blockbuster moniker? Instead of an interdimensional wormhole machine guarded by space marines, the reality was a whole lot more bureaucratic. For over 2 decades, Stargate was essentially a rotating cast of sleep-deprived military officers and civilian psychics sitting around windowless rooms in Maryland and California, squinting real hard at yellow legal pads, and trying to guess the layout of a naval shipyard in Siberia, using nothing more than the power of positive thinking and a stale cup of coffee. It wasn't a portal to the stars. It was essentially an astral projection office job. How the world of ufology totally misunderstood it. Naturally, the moment the CIA declassified the program's files, the global UFO and fringe history community took one look at the name Stargate, threw a massive party, and immediately drove the narrative right off the intellectual cliff. Here is where ufology got a bit too carried away, confusing espionage with ET:. Many enthusiastic researchers treated Stargate's declassification as the smoking gun admission that the Pentagon was using psychics to chat with Pleiadians or track crashed flying saucers. In reality, the program had almost nothing to do with UFOs. It was a cold, calculated intelligence-gathering exercise focused entirely on mortal, earthbound enemies, like Soviet missile silos and hostage crises, treating doodles like divine revelation. Ufologists often look at the raw, wildly ambiguous remote viewing sketches, the squiggly lines, the blobby circles, the half-drawn boxes, and treat them like infallible, sacred geometry dropped down from a higher dimension. They completely gloss over the fact that for every time a psychic accidentally guessed the shape of a submarine, there were 50 other sessions where they confidently swore a top-secret radar station was actually a parking lot full of happy little trees. The Jedi Master Fantasy. Pop culture loves to paint Stargate's participants as secret, high-level psychic ninjas operating in a world of pure, mystical enlightenment. The actual administrative reports paint a much funnier, deeply human picture. A bunch of exhausted government employees trying desperately to extract actionable data out of random brain static, while dealing with congressional budget cuts and middle management pressure. Project Stargate didn't unlock the secrets of the cosmos, and it certainly didn't give the Pentagon a magic crystal ball. But it did prove something endlessly amusing about human nature. When panic sets in and the world feels like it's ending, even the most rigidly rational, buttoned-up military generals on Earth are secretly willing to believe that someone, somewhere, can read a secret document with their eyelids closed. So no, Stargate wasn't a portal to another dimension. But it remains the greatest government-funded role-playing game in human history, proving that when the Cold War got weird enough, the U.S. military was ready to risk it all, open the third eye, and try to win global supremacy with a box of Crayola markers. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archived Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.